The studio lights burned hotter than anyone expected, casting a white glare across the polished desk where two figures faced each other. Cameras rolled, microphones quivered, and in the gallery a hush settled so deep it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. Then it happened. A single line cutting through the room like shattered glass. "Tell me," the anchor sneered, voice low but laced with contempt, "how can someone like you claim to represent real Americans?" The words hit with the force of a slap, and a ripple of gasps broke from the audience as phones flew up to capture the moment. For a heartbeat, the hero didn't move. Her hands rested calmly on the desk, her eyes steady and unflinching, like a storm contained in glass. The villain smirked, certain he had landed the blow that would tilt the segment in his favor. But the room told a different story. Producers leaning forward in disbelief, interns exchanging looks of panic, the soft whir of cameras magnifying every breath. Social media was already alive, a silent roar building as captions and clips began to circulate seconds after the insult left his mouth. The tension was electric. You could almost hear the heartbeat of a nation sinking with that moment, millions of viewers leaning closer to their screens. For the villain, it was a performance of dominance. For the hero, it was an invitation to something greater. Her silence didn't signal defeat. It signaled calculation, a coiled power waiting to unfurl. Every detail, from the tremor in the anchor's voice to the subtle arch of her eyebrow, promised a reversal no one had predicted. And then, in the smallest of gestures, she tilted her head and allowed a quiet, knowing smile to bloom. That single expression carried a message. The game had just begun, and the balance of power was about to shift. The cameras drank it in, the audience felt it in their bones, and somewhere online, the first hashtag was already trending. The confrontation that would define the night was still ahead, and the studio, the country, could sense it. But this was only the opening move.
Hours before the confrontation erupted, the network had billed this segment as a candid conversation about America's future. In reality, it was a powder keg waiting for a spark. The show was one of the most watched Sunday broadcasts in the country, the kind of program that shapes political careers, sets the news agenda for the week, and draws a cross-section of viewers hungry for spectacle as much as substance. Ratings were already soaring. Producers had teased this matchup for days, promising a debate that would strip the varnish off polite politics and reveal the real fault lines running through the nation. On one side sat the anchor, a figure known for provocation masked as questioning, whose clipped tone and raised eyebrow had rattled many guests before. On the other sat the rising public servant whose story had resonated with communities often erased from the national narrative. She had built her platform not on celebrity or scandal, but on lived experience and a vision for inclusion. For her supporters, seeing her at that table was more than a media appearance. It was representation, long overdue and hard-won. Beneath the bright studio lights, every word carried more weight than usual. Polling numbers, donor momentum, and public sentiment were all in play. The confrontation wasn't simply a clash of egos. It was a live referendum on whose vision of America would prevail. In the control room, producers whispered about viral potential, knowing full well that a single clip from this segment could dominate the news cycle, sway undecided voters, and alter political destinies. Out in the real world, anticipation was already bubbling. Activists, students, and everyday viewers had organized watch parties. Journalists had queued up tweets in advance. Hashtags like "Who Speaks for Us" and "Live on Air" were trending before the opening credits rolled.
Across social media, the tension was palpable, people primed for a moment they could either cheer or condemn. In coffee shops and group chats, viewers framed it as a test. Could a woman of color, an immigrant's daughter, stand toe-to-toe with the establishment and not just survive, but dominate? This wasn't only about one segment or one insult. It was about symbolic terrain. Who owns the story of Americanness? Whose dignity counts? Whose questions get asked and answered on national TV? Every second on air became a chance to reclaim narrative space or to be erased again. Even those who normally ignored political talk shows tuned in, drawn by the buzz and the sense that something unpredictable was about to happen. And so, when that first line was launched, the insult, questioning her right to belong, to lead, to represent, it landed on an audience already electrified. The insult wasn't merely personal. It echoed decades of gatekeeping and exclusion. Viewers felt that echo in their chests. Clips of the moment began to ricochet across Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok before the anchor had even finished speaking. Influencers posted reaction videos in real time. Community leaders wrote threads about what this really means. By the time the initial shock subsided, the stakes had grown exponentially. What started as a TV segment had become a national flashpoint, a prism through which millions would debate identity, power, and belonging. The battle unfolding under studio lights was poised to leave fingerprints on policy debates, voting blocs, and the cultural conversation for weeks, maybe months. And then, the background of each figure began to surface.
Long before the lights of the studio flared and the insults sliced through the air, the man seated across from her had already built his reputation on spectacle. He had climbed the political ladder not through quiet diligence or genuine service, but by wielding outrage as a weapon. His name had become synonymous with prime-time provocation, an architect of sound bites designed to go viral, a politician who treated hearings like theater stages and debates like cage matches. He was the kind of figure whose every public appearance seemed scripted for confrontation, a performance of dominance tailored for cable news highlight reels. He started as a small-town prosecutor, cultivating a reputation for zero tolerance that, behind closed doors, was riddled with inconsistencies. In one case, he pursued harsh penalties against low-level offenders while quietly shielding well-connected allies from similar consequences. The headlines praised his toughness, but the communities on the receiving end whispered about the imbalance of justice. That paradox became his signature, the ability to cloak opportunism in the language of moral certainty, to project strength while protecting his own. By the time he reached the national stage, his persona was fully formed. Suits cut sharp, voice trained for maximum gravitas. He learned to look directly into the camera as if daring the audience to blink. He branded himself as a defender of real America, a phrase that thrilled some and alienated many. His speeches dripped with nostalgia for a country that had never existed as he described it. Behind the curtain, staffers reported flashes of temper, lavish demands, and a fixation on image over substance. He thrived on conflict because conflict distracted from contradictions. Controversy clung to him like a second skin. Campaign finance irregularities, a revolving door of consultants under investigation, and a pattern of dismissing allegations as smears. Each episode chipped away at his veneer, but never quite broke it. His supporters admired his refusal to apologize, seeing it as proof of conviction. Critics saw it as arrogance bordering on contempt. Yet the cracks were visible to anyone who looked closely. A quiver at the corner of his mouth during tough questioning. The abrupt way he cut off colleagues who disagreed. The late-night social media tirades betraying insecurity beneath the swagger.
He built entire press conferences around vilifying immigrants and questioning the loyalty of public servants who didn't mirror his worldview. He framed complex social issues as binary moral tests, turning nuance into ammunition. But for all the bluster, there were moments, caught off mic or in leaked memos, that hinted at fear. Fear of losing relevance. Fear of being outshone by someone who embodied the very diversity he derided. Those leaks showed a man scanning polls obsessively, bristling at the rise of new voices, and resenting that the country he claimed to represent was changing faster than his talking points. The confrontation on live television was not an accident, but a strategy. His team had previewed aggressive questions, hoping to rattle his opponent into a viral misstep. They knew that his base responded to dominance displays, and they counted on the spectacle to reinforce his brand. But what they underestimated was how prepared she would be, and how much of his own baggage was already primed to explode under scrutiny. As the cameras rolled, viewers who had watched him for years sensed the familiar pattern: the tight smile, the thinly veiled insult, the assumption that he could provoke without consequence. Yet something in the air was different this time. Social media didn't react with applause or indifference, but with an avalanche of skepticism. Old clips resurfaced of him making contradictory claims. Screenshots of past scandals circulated anew, like ghosts arriving at the exact wrong moment. The narrative of strength he had spent years cultivating began to wobble in real time. Even his posture betrayed strain. Under the immaculate suit and practiced gestures was a man unaccustomed to genuine resistance, a performer facing an audience that had grown tired of the act. The mask of confidence he wore so easily was cracking at the edges, and the world could see it. Inside the studio, producers traded glances as if sensing that the so-called villain of the night was not just attacking, but exposing himself. He had built his empire on the idea that certain people did not belong, that they could be interrogated out of public life. Yet here he was, facing someone whose very existence defied his narrative. Someone who had weathered storms far greater than a primetime ambush. His strategy, provoke, dominate, dismiss, was slipping through his fingers like sand. And somewhere beyond the camera's reach, a different story was assembling itself. One of endurance, representation, and dignity, poised to confront his decades-old tactics. But the other guest wasn't just another politician. They had lived a story built for this moment.
Before the studio lights, before the viral moment, she was simply the daughter of a cab driver and a seamstress, raised in a neighborhood where English mingled with half a dozen other languages on the stoops of walk-up buildings. Her earliest memories weren't of privilege, but of the rhythms of survival, late-night shifts, quiet sacrifices, and the sound of her parents whispering in the kitchen about bills they weren't sure they could pay. Yet even then she sensed something larger at work, that dignity was not measured by wealth, but by the way people treated one another. She learned early on how to navigate two worlds. In the mornings, she translated mail and utility bills for her parents. In the afternoons, she joined classmates in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance, trying to pronounce each word with the same crisp confidence as the kids whose families had been here for generations. She bore the teasing, the sideways glances, and the unspoken question, "Do you belong here?" and turned it into fuel. Teachers noticed her relentless preparation, her empathy toward other students who felt unseen, and the steadiness with which she refused to be rattled. When her father was injured on the job, she took on part-time work while still in high school, juggling shifts at a local diner and tutoring younger students for extra cash. That crucible formed her sense of responsibility. It also forged a kind of composure that would later become her hallmark in public life. While others flinched at insults, she had already faced the quiet humiliations of bureaucracy, the exhaustion of translation, and the precariousness of an immigrant family one setback away from disaster.
College was not handed to her. She won it through scholarships, grants, and late-night study sessions under a flickering desk lamp. She majored in public policy and community health, disciplines that would anchor her future advocacy. In campus meetings, she wasn't the loudest voice, but she was the one who read every page of the proposed policy, who thought about the janitors and cafeteria workers whose names no one else remembered. Her professors later recalled that she had an almost preternatural calm during debates, not a lack of passion, but a capacity to hold complexity without being consumed by it. After graduation, she returned to her city rather than heading to a think tank or a corporate law firm. She took a job at a nonprofit clinic serving immigrants and low-income families. There she learned how systems fail the very people they claim to protect, and she learned how to navigate those systems anyway. Translating forms, accompanying people to hearings, knocking on agency doors until someone listened. That period etched deep grooves of empathy and persistence into her character. When she finally ran for local office, it wasn't with glossy consultants or national donors, but with volunteers who had once stood in line with her at food pantries. Her campaign was built on kitchen table meetings and community potlucks, walking blocks until her shoes wore thin. She refused to demonize opponents, but refused even more strongly to back down when they misrepresented her constituents. Each victory was hard-won, each setback instructive. She learned how to smile through hecklers, how to keep her voice steady when colleagues tried to sideline her, how to push legislation forward by sheer force of credibility. Her rise to national prominence was less about ambition than about necessity. When a series of high-profile hearings threatened to erase immigrant perspectives from the conversation, she testified, delivering data and personal stories in the same breath. Clips of her questioning officials went viral, not because she shouted, but because she dismantled misinformation with surgical precision. Commentators called her the calm at the center of the storm. For the communities who had long waited to see themselves represented, she became proof that composure could be power. Yet behind the accolades was the same woman who still visited her parents every Sunday, still translated letters for neighbors, still carried the laminated prayer card her mother had slipped into her wallet the day she left for college. Her humility was not a performance, but a practice. Staffers noticed she thanked janitors by name, answered constituent emails personally, and kept her office open late for those who couldn't leave work early. The steadiness that looked effortless on television was in fact a discipline honed over decades. Friends say she approaches each public clash like a lawyer, a social worker, and a community organizer rolled into one, gathering facts, centering dignity, and choosing her words to open doors rather than slam them. That is why the insult hurled at her on live TV did not catch her off guard. She had heard versions of it whispered in hallways, shouted at rallies, scribbled in comment sections. She had already rehearsed in her mind how to confront such contempt without losing herself. What her opponent didn't understand was that she was not a guest on his stage, but a leader stepping into hers. Every hardship, every late-night study session, every door knocked in the rain had prepared her for the moment when a hostile question would try to delegitimize her very existence. She did not see it as humiliation, but as confirmation. She had arrived at the heart of the national conversation, and she wasn't leaving. All of it led to this one televised clash.
The cameras cut back to the polished desk, and the tension that had been simmering beneath polite introductions ignited like a match in dry tinder. The anchor leaned forward, his tone sharpened, each word dripping with challenge. So you claim to speak for every community? But how do you answer critics who say your policies favor only a select few? The words punctuated the room, and the audience shifted in their seats, a collective exhale of anticipation vibrating through the studio. She didn't flinch. Her hands remained folded on the desk. her gaze steady on him, absorbing the barbs without breaking composure. The contrast was immediate and cinematic. One figure thrashing for dominance, the other radiating calm confidence. He snapped another question, louder this time, injecting sarcasm and incredulity. "Do you even understand how government works?" His smirk widened, a predator certain of his victory. The hero responded with a quiet correction, facts delivered in measured cadence, her voice a stabilizing pulse against his rising frenzy. The studio seemed to bend around her composure. Every pause, every carefully chosen word drew attention, forcing the viewers at home to lean in. Cutaways captured the crowd, journalists scribbling notes, interns exchanging wide-eyed glances, even the host momentarily caught off guard by her clarity. Each reaction amplified the tension, like a drumbeat in a growing storm. He escalated. His gestures became sharp, slicing through the air, his tone rising into anger, an unfamiliar tremor creeping into his voice. He attempted to dominate the narrative, interrupting mid-sentence, throwing out rapid-fire accusations and loaded questions. Yet with every outburst, she remained unshaken, listening, waiting, occasionally pausing just long enough for the camera to linger on her serene expression. The contrast could not have been starker. Chaos versus composure, arrogance versus poise. The studio's heartbeat seemed to synchronize with the exchange. Every gasp, every whisper of surprise from the audience punctuated the tension. His interruptions, meant to destabilize, only served to highlight her resilience. Viewers at home were drawn into the drama, fingers hovering over screens to record, tweet, and clip every exchange. The social feeds lit up in real time. Hashtags surged, commentators speculated, and snippets began to circulate, capturing the escalating battle. Hashtag composed versus arrogant, and hashtag who controls the room trended within minutes as online audiences dissected each inflection, each pause, each glare. He attempted one final maneuver, a rapid-fire volley of insinuations trying to trap her in a contradiction. The hero's eyes narrowed slightly, a subtle acknowledgement of the attack, then she inhaled, steady, deliberate, and let the room absorb the silence that followed. The pause stretched, heartbeat long, a cinematic beat that felt eternal to viewers and participants alike. The villain's smirk faltered, momentarily replaced by a flicker of doubt as he sensed the shift. The spectacle he had meticulously orchestrated was slipping through his fingers. Audience reactions punctuated the tension further. A gasp from a journalist, the click of a pen dropping, the murmur of disbelief rippling through interns and camera operators alike. Each sound magnified the drama, each small reaction building a crescendo. She had not yet responded fully, yet her restraint amplified the impending impact. The villain's erratic behavior, once a shield of dominance, now highlighted vulnerability. Every second seemed calibrated to maximize suspense. Every glance, every pause, every tense inhalation underscored the stakes. This wasn't just a televised debate. It was a test of legitimacy, authority, and resilience. Viewers at home felt the weight of history pressing in through the screen. Every heartbeat, every flicker of doubt, every trace of control slipping from the antagonist became part of a larger story that was about to erupt. And then, the moment that no one saw coming.
The silence stretched for a heartbeat that seemed to suspend the very air in the studio. The villain, flushed with frustration, had expected a flinch, a stumble, anything that could be spun into a soundbite. Instead, the hero leaned forward, her eyes steady, her voice calm but precise. "Let's talk about what real service looks like," she began, and immediately the tone shifted. It was not anger, it was clarity, a force more compelling than any shout or accusation. She recounted stories of neighborhoods long neglected, of families navigating the bureaucracy of healthcare and immigration without a lifeline. She spoke of the single mother who had to walk miles to access basic medical care, the children who couldn't afford textbooks, the elderly who were denied services due to paperwork mistakes. Each anecdote was paired with numbers,
evidence, and dates, every statistic tied to a human face. The camera lingered on her, capturing the controlled cadence, the subtle inflection that lent gravity to every word. The villain's mouth opened, shut, and opened again, trying to interject, but she had mastered the rhythm of pause. She allowed the silence to punctuate each point, letting the weight of her argument settle. "You see," she continued, her tone rising just slightly, "this isn't theory. These are lives. And when policies are designed to exclude, to marginalize, to silence, it's not just statistics on a page, it's people suffering, and we all pay the cost when we ignore it." Her words landed like a hammer striking iron. The villain attempted a retort, but she cut across him smoothly, citing a recent report showing the exact consequences of his favored policies. Her facts were indisputable, her logic airtight, and the juxtaposition of her calm delivery against his frantic gesturing created a visual tension that no editing could manufacture. The studio fell into a rhythm of disbelief. The anchor's jaw slackened, his hands froze mid-gesture, camera operators leaned forward anticipating the next beat. Even the audience, trained to expect chaos and theatrics, found themselves holding their breath, caught between admiration and shock. Social media had exploded in real time. Tweets and live clips spiked by the thousands. Hashtags like Truth in Action and Mic Drop Moment erupted within minutes. Memes began to circulate even as she spoke, capturing every steady glance, every punctuated statistic, every moment where the villain's confidence visibly wavered. And yet she didn't relent. Her narrative deepened. She recounted her own journey, the long nights balancing school and work, the community meetings that shaped her policies, the personal losses that informed her empathy. "I've walked those streets," she said softly, almost conversationally. "I've seen the systems fail people I love. That's why I fight." It was an emotional sledgehammer, delivered without theatrics, without malice, but with an undeniable force. The cameras cut to the villain, whose carefully maintained mask began to crack. His smirk faltered, the glint of certainty in his eyes dimmed, and for the first time the air of invulnerability was gone. She pressed forward, layering argument upon argument with precision. She cited successful community initiatives, legislative victories, and bipartisan support she had garnered for programs benefiting marginalized groups. Each example was another chisel strike against the wall of arrogance he had built for decades. He tried to interrupt again, voice rising, face red, but she sidestepped, paused, and delivered the next line with surgical timing. The room reacted in waves, a gasp from the front row, a quiet murmur from a journalist taking notes, a barely perceptible shake of the anchor's head. Every reaction became part of the story, amplifying the tension and the stakes. And then she leaned in, not aggressively, not triumphantly, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knew history was on her side. "The truth," she said, "isn't about who shouts the loudest or dominates a headline. The truth is about whose actions protect people, whose policies uplift communities, and whose courage stands even when the odds are stacked against them. That's leadership. That's service. That's responsibility. And it's long overdue." Her words struck like a bell tolling, resonating through the studio, across the nation, and into the feeds of millions watching live. Micro cliffhangers punctuated the exchange. A subtle glance, a pause to let the weight of each point sink in, a shift in the villain's posture, all of it suggested that the moment of reckoning was still unfolding. The audience leaned forward in unison, cameras lingered, and social media erupted with commentary. Clips circulated showing every decisive beat, her calm correction of a false claim, her poised response to a loaded question, the precise dismantling of a narrative built over decades. Experts live tweeting in real time offered praise, viewers reposted segments, and the digital echo amplified her dominance even beyond the studio walls. Yet she didn't finish. She transitioned into a call for shared responsibility, connecting the personal and the political. "We all have a role," she said, "to hold each other accountable, to ensure fairness, to challenge systems that fail people quietly every day. Leadership isn't just about the podium or the camera. It's about every action we take to create a society where dignity is non-negotiable." Each word landed like a measured strike, systematically dismantling not just arguments, but the very foundation of the antagonist's arrogance. The antagonist attempted a last flourish, a rapid rebuttal, a sneer, an appeal to authority, but the audience, primed by what they had just witnessed, barely flinched. She had already moved past the moment of confrontation and into the realm of lasting impact. The anchor's interruptions were swallowed by the clarity of her narrative. Every hesitated glance from the villain became a visual confirmation. The battle for perception had decisively shifted. And as the segment drew to its natural apex, she delivered her final point with understated yet undeniable authority, a blend of moral clarity and empirical truth that no theatrics could overshadow. But the best was yet to come.
The moment the broadcast ended, the world seemed to pause. Phones lit up in living rooms, bars, and coffee shops across the nation. Clips of her calm dismantling of the antagonist's arguments spread like wildfire, first on Twitter, then TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. Hashtags like #MicDropMoment, #TruthInAction, and #WhoSpeaksForUs climbed trending lists within minutes. Every new post, every share, every reaction built a ripple that soon became a tidal wave. Celebrities and influencers weighed in with videos, tweets, and Instagram stories. One actor known for political activism tweeted, "Finally, someone who speaks not just for headlines, but for people." A well-known journalist shared a clip with the caption, "Watch her, learn from her. Leadership looks like this." Even sports figures chimed in, their messages carrying the weight of audiences who rarely followed political talk shows but found themselves glued to the screen this time. Social media, which often thrives on chaos and spectacle, was instead flooded with admiration and validation. Memes proliferated across platforms, but unlike the usual mocking content aimed at viral moments, these celebrated her composure. A popular one depicted her leaning forward at the desk with text reading, "When facts meet courage, history notices." Another juxtaposed the antagonist's erratic gestures with her calm demeanor, captioned, "One storm, one calm." It wasn't just entertainment, it was cultural commentary, a collective recognition that something significant had unfolded. News outlets scrambled to cover the event's aftermath. Opinion pieces appeared online and in print within hours, analyzing every exchange, dissecting every pause, and debating the implications. Headlines ranged from "A New Standard for Civility and Politics" to "She Stood Unshaken, What This Means for the Next Election." Analysts dissected the debate in panels, podcasts, and live streams, replaying her statements frame by frame, parsing the emotional weight as much as the logical precision. In each case, the narrative was clear. This wasn't just a single televised appearance, it was a cultural flashpoint. Audiences across the country reacted in real time. Community centers hosted watch parties that turned into forums. Students discussed the segment in classrooms, and workplaces replayed clips on lunchroom TVs. People connected personally with her story and her performance. For many, she represented an ideal often absent from political theater: integrity, calm, and service. Social validation wasn't just online, it was tangible, felt in shared excitement, pride, and hope.
The antagonist's team scrambled to regain control of the narrative. Attempts to frame the debate as a win for their candidate fell flat in the face of viral clips showing composure triumphing over chaos. Analysts noted the subtle signs of a shifting public perception. Donations plateaued, social media sentiment skewed against him, and opinion polls hinted at a credibility gap widening in real time. The studio footage, meant to bolster his dominance, had become evidence of vulnerability. Even casual viewers sensed the fracture, the once untouchable public persona now exposed to scrutiny on a national stage. Meanwhile, supporters of the hero celebrated not only her performance, but the deeper message it conveyed. Hashtags were paired with personal stories, immigrants recounting their struggles, young professionals sharing obstacles overcome, and families expressing pride in representation finally seen on national TV. It was more than a moment of celebrity or spectacle, it was a shared, emotionally resonant validation of identity, resilience, and community. Across platforms, a chorus emerged. This was someone fighting not just for herself, but for every voice too long ignored. The scale of attention created new tensions. Both figures now faced heightened expectations. For her, every future move would be measured against this defining moment. The world had witnessed her strength, and audiences would demand she live up to the narrative she had just cemented. For him, every misstep became magnified, every public appearance scrutinized through the lens of this defeat. The stakes of perception, credibility, and influence had never been higher. The ripple effects extended beyond politics and social media. Policy discussions, community organizing, and even national discourse were influenced by what had transpired in that studio. The hero's performance reframed debates around dignity, service, and leadership. People were no longer asking who was loudest or most provocative. They were asking who was steady, who served, and who could inspire real change. For those watching, the lesson was immediate. Courage paired with preparation could reshape narratives, influence opinion, and shift cultural perception. Her calm authority had created a ripple that was already becoming a wave, one that would continue to affect the conversation long after the broadcast ended. Yet amid the frenzy, one powerful lesson began to emerge.
In the days following the broadcast, the narrative began to shift from confrontation to reflection. What had started as a clash of personalities evolved into a story about values, integrity, and the enduring power of dignity. Newsrooms, social media feeds, and community forums alike began highlighting not just what had been said, but how it had been said, calmly, deliberately, and with unwavering respect for truth. Her performance became more than a moment of political theater. It became a lesson in leadership itself. She framed the encounter not as a personal victory, but as a triumph for everyone who had ever been underestimated or dismissed. In interviews, she emphasized a simple yet profound principle. Dignity is not given by applause or headlines. It's maintained in every choice we make, especially when challenged. Columnists and thought leaders echoed the sentiment, writing op-eds that celebrated how composure, empathy, and preparation could overcome arrogance and spectacle. The conversation was no longer about who had shouted louder, but about who had stood for something greater. Viral quotes and clips continued to circulate, each reinforcing the message. One snippet, showing her quiet but firm correction of misinformation, was paired with captions like, "Courage doesn't yell, it acts." Another, in which she addressed systemic inequities with clarity and compassion, sparked thousands of shares from educators, activists, and everyday citizens who saw their own struggles reflected in her words. Social media became a classroom, and she had become the teacher, modeling a way to confront hostility without sacrificing principle. Community leaders reported a renewed sense of hope. Town halls, online forums, and neighborhood meetings buzzed with discussions about responsibility, civic engagement, and the value of listening. Citizens shared stories of how the segment had inspired them to act. volunteering, advocating, or simply standing up for someone marginalized. Her calm yet powerful example transformed a televised debate into a catalyst for change, proving that leadership is measured not in victories over others, but in the impact one has on the lives and hopes of a community. Even her critics, while reluctant, began to acknowledge the lesson. Commentators admitted the moment had revealed the limits of aggression and performative dominance. Journalists noted the shift in public discourse. People were debating ideas and solutions rather than personalities and insults. For a brief but powerful moment, the conversation turned toward justice, equity, and accountability, principles that transcended partisan divides and personal grievances. The crescendo of this moral arc reached its peak in the responses of ordinary viewers. Families shared videos of their children watching the segment and discussing fairness. Students debated civics and ethics inspired by the encounter. And citizens across communities celebrated representation that had long been absent from national dialogue. The hero's example was not simply admired, it was internalized. People were beginning to understand that dignity, courage, and integrity were not abstract ideals, but actionable traits that could reshape culture and policy alike. Her closing reflections reinforced this universal truth. We are stronger when we lift each other up, when we demand fairness, and when we refuse to let fear or arrogance dictate our actions. The line reverberated across the country, spoken in classrooms, echoed in civic spaces, and amplified through countless social media shares. It was a reminder that leadership is measured not in victories over others, but in the impact one has on the lives and hopes of a community. As the dust settled, one final takeaway became clear.
This wasn't just a debate. It was a turning point. On a stage lit by cameras and scrutiny, one voice rose above noise and hostility, proving that composure, preparation, and integrity could outshine arrogance and spectacle. The moment captured in this video, the calm dismantling of attacks, the unwavering dedication to truth and justice, reminds us that leadership is more than headlines. It is courage in action, service in practice, and dignity maintained in the face of provocation. Every pause, every carefully chosen word, every steady glance wasn't just performance, it was a lesson for every viewer who has ever been underestimated or dismissed. It showed that representation matters, that history remembers those who act with principle, and that real change comes when we refuse to compromise our values. For communities long unheard, this was validation. For those watching from all corners of the country, it was a blueprint for how to confront adversity without surrendering identity or purpose. Now it's our turn. Share this story. Talk about it with your friends, your family, your community. Let the conversation spread beyond this screen. Subscribe to stay connected, because moments like this are rare, but their impact can echo indefinitely. Stay informed. Hold leaders accountable, and take part in shaping the society you want to see. The clash you witnessed here wasn't simply about one moment in a studio, it was a call to action, a reminder that courage paired with integrity can shift narratives, influence hearts, and inspire change. Carry that lesson forward. Be the witness, the participant, and the change maker in your own story. Because this moment proves one enduring truth. Dignity always matters, and courage always counts.